I thought I was living every mother's dream as I watched my beautiful daughter Emily walk down the aisle in her stunning white gown, surrounded by mountain peaks and 200 of our closest friends and family. The ceremony was everything we had planned for 18 months, every detail perfect, every moment magical. But when the pastor asked if anyone objected to this union, and my ex-husband Robert suddenly stood up from the back row and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stop this now, Emily, you can't marry him because he's already married to someone else." I felt my heart stop beating and my perfect world crumble into a million pieces right there in front of everyone I'd ever cared about. What happened next was so shocking, so devastating, and so completely unexpected that it would either destroy my family forever or save us in ways I never could have imagined. But the man I'd spent 15 years hating for abandoning our family was about to become the hero of the most dramatic day of our lives, and the groom my daughter thought she knew was about to be exposed as someone far more dangerous than any of us could have ever suspected. My name is Linda Harrison, I'm 52 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years as a single mother in Denver, Colorado, working as a high school guidance counselor, and raising my daughter Emily on my own after my ex-husband Robert walked out on us when Emily was just 11 years old. I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me when Emily graduated college, got a good job as a marketing coordinator, and fell in love with what seemed like the perfect man. But I was wrong. The hardest part was just beginning. Emily met James Morrison 2 years ago at a charity fundraiser where she was volunteering for a local animal shelter. James was 30 years old, devastatingly handsome with dark hair and green eyes, impeccably dressed, and charming in a way that made everyone in the room gravitate toward him. He told Emily he was an architect who had moved to Denver from Boston to start his own firm, that he'd grown up in a close-knit family, and that he'd been waiting his whole life to meet someone like her. From their very first date, Emily was completely smitten. She'd come home with stars in her eyes, talking about how James was different from every other guy she dated, how he was mature and sophisticated and treated her like a princess. He brought her flowers every Friday, remembered every important date, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me and becoming part of our little family. I have to admit, I was impressed with James from the beginning. After years of watching Emily date guys who were either immature, unreliable, or just plain wrong for her, James seemed like everything I'd hoped she would find. He had excellent manners, a successful career, and most importantly, he made Emily happier than I'd seen her since she was a little girl. James's family lived in Boston, he explained, and while he was close to them, he rarely got to see them because he was so focused on building his business in Denver. His parents were both doctors, he told us, and he had a younger sister who was studying to be a veterinarian. They sounded like wonderful people, and I looked forward to meeting them when the time was right. The relationship moved quickly, but not in a way that raised any red flags. James was clearly serious about Emily from the beginning, talking about their future together, making long-term plans, and treating her with the kind of respect and love that every mother wants for her daughter. When he proposed to Emily after 18 months of dating, it was everything she dreamed of. A romantic dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first date, followed by a proposal on the rooftop garden with the Denver skyline sparkling behind them. Emily called me at midnight, sobbing with happiness, and I drove over to her apartment immediately to see the ring and hear every detail of how it happened. The ring was gorgeous, a 2-carat diamond solitaire that must have cost a fortune, and James had clearly put a lot of thought into making the moment special. As I hugged my daughter and saw how radiant she looked, I felt like all the sacrifices I'd made as a single mother had been worth it to see her this happy. The wedding planning began immediately, and it quickly became clear that this was going to be the event of a lifetime. James wanted Emily to have everything she'd ever dreamed of, and honestly, so did I. I'd been saving money for Emily's wedding since she was in high school, working extra hours tutoring students and taking on additional responsibilities at school to build up the wedding fund. When James insisted on paying for half of everything, I was grateful but also determined to contribute equally to giving Emily the perfect day. We chose Wildwood Lodge, a luxury resort in the Rocky Mountains about 2 hours outside of Denver. The venue was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking snow-capped peaks, rustic wooden beams, and a ceremony space that looked like something out of a fairy tale. The reception hall could accommodate 200 guests, and we spared no expense on flowers, music, catering, and photography. Emily found her dream dress at a boutique in downtown Denver, A stunning A-line gown with delicate lace details and a cathedral train that made her look like a princess. We spent months choosing every detail. The bridesmaids' dresses in dusty rose, the groomsmen's charcoal gray suits, the menu featuring locally sourced mountain trout and Colorado lamb, and a 3-tier cake decorated with sugar flowers that matched Emily's bouquet. James was involved in every aspect of the planning, and I was impressed by how much he cared about making the day perfect for Emily. He handled all the arrangements for his side of the family, booking their hotel rooms and coordinating their travel from Boston. His parents and sister were planning to fly in 2 days before the wedding, and I was excited to finally meet them after hearing so much about them for 2 years. The only shadow on the entire process was the question of whether to invite Robert, Emily's father. Emily and I had barely heard from Robert in the past 15 years. After our divorce, he'd been sporadic with child support payments, missed most of Emily's important events, and gradually faded out of our lives entirely. Emily had tried to maintain a relationship with him when she was younger, but after years of broken promises and disappointments, she'd given up trying to have a father-daughter relationship with someone who clearly wasn't interested in being a father. "I don't even know where he lives anymore," Emily said when we were addressing wedding invitations. "And honestly, Mom, I don't want him there. This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and I don't want to spend it wondering if he's going to show up drunk or cause some kind of scene." I agreed completely. Robert had caused enough pain in our lives, and Emily's wedding day should be about celebrating her future with James, not dwelling on the disappointments of the past. We decided not to send him an invitation, and honestly, I didn't think he would even know about the wedding unless he happened to see something on social media, which was unlikely since Emily had blocked him on all her accounts years ago. The week before the wedding was a whirlwind of final preparations, family arriving from out of town, and the kind of happy chaos that comes with a big celebration. Emily was staying with me in my house, having moved out of the apartment she shared with James so they could have the traditional separation before the wedding. She was radiant, practically glowing with excitement, and I felt so proud of the strong, beautiful, successful woman she'd become. James's family arrived on Thursday, 2 days before the Saturday wedding, and I finally got to meet the people I'd been hearing about for 2 years. Dr. Richard Morrison and Dr. Patricia Morrison were a distinguished-looking couple in their late 50s, both physicians who carried themselves with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of saving lives. James's sister Rebecca was a petite blonde who seemed sweet but a little shy, which James explained was just her personality around people she didn't know well. We had dinner together Thursday night at one of Denver's best restaurants, and I was struck by how formal and reserved James's family seemed. They were polite and well-mannered, but there was something distant about them, like they were holding themselves back from really engaging with Emily or me. I chalked it up to East Coast reserve or maybe just nerves about the wedding, and I made extra effort to make them feel welcome and included. The rehearsal dinner on Friday night was beautiful, held at a historic mansion in downtown Denver with about 50 of our closest family and friends. Emily looked stunning in a navy blue dress, and James was handsome in a perfectly tailored suit. The speeches were heartfelt, the food was delicious, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. During the rehearsal dinner, I noticed that James seemed a little more tense than usual. When I asked him if everything was okay, he said he was just nervous about the ceremony and wanted everything to be perfect for Emily. I thought it was sweet that he cared so much, and I told him that Emily was lucky to have found someone who loved her as much as he obviously did. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with brilliant blue skies and the kind of mountain sunshine that makes everything look like a postcard. Emily and her bridesmaids had spent the night at the resort, and I arrived early to help with hair and makeup. The bridal suite was filled with laughter and champagne as Emily got ready for the biggest day of her life. Emily looked absolutely radiant. The hairstylist had created an elegant updo that showed off the diamond earrings James had given her as a wedding gift, and her makeup was flawless, highlighting her natural beauty without being overdone. When she put on her wedding dress and I buttoned up the dozens of tiny buttons along the back, I started crying because she looked so perfect, so happy, so ready to begin this new chapter of her life. "Mom, don't cry yet," Emily laughed, handing me a tissue. "We haven't even gotten to the ceremony." "I can't help it," I said, smoothing her veil. "You look so beautiful and you're so happy. This is everything I ever wanted for you." The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock in the afternoon, with cocktails and appetizers to follow. then dinner and dancing until late into the evening. By 3:30, the guests had all arrived and were seated in the ceremony space, which had been transformed into something magical with white roses, candles, and flowing fabric that caught the mountain breeze coming through the open doors. I took my seat in the front row, wearing a mother-of-the-bride dress in champagne silk that Emily had helped me choose, and looked around at all the people who had come to celebrate this special day. Emily's college friends, our neighbors, my colleagues from school, James's business associates, and family members from both sides were all there, dressed in their finest and clearly excited to witness the union of two people who were so obviously in love. James stood at the altar with his groomsmen, looking handsome and nervous in his black tuxedo. The string quartet began playing, and Emily's bridesmaids made their way down the aisle, each one beautiful in their dusty rose gowns. Then the music changed to the bridal march, and everyone stood as Emily appeared at the back of the aisle, her arm linked through mine since her father wasn't there to walk her down. Emily looked like something out of a fairy tale as we made our way slowly down the aisle. Her dress was perfect, her veil caught the light streaming through the windows, and she had a smile that could have lit up the entire mountain range. I could see James watching her with an expression of love and adoration that made my heart swell with happiness for my daughter. When we reached the altar, I kissed Emily's cheek and placed her hand in James's, officially giving my blessing to their union. I took my seat and watched as Pastor Williams, whom we'd chosen because he'd known Emily since she was a teenager, began the beautiful ceremony we'd planned so carefully. Dearly beloved, Pastor Williams began, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and in the face of this company to join together James Morrison and Emily Harrison in holy matrimony, which is an honorable estate, instituted by God in the time of man's innocence, signifying unto us the mystical union that is betwixt Christ and his church. The ceremony was proceeding exactly as we'd rehearsed. Emily and James exchanged personal vows that they'd written for each other, both of them getting emotional as they promised to love, honor, and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. James slipped the wedding band onto Emily's finger, and she did the same for him, both of them smiling through tears of happiness. Pastor Williams continued with the traditional ceremony, and I was thinking about how perfect everything had turned out, how happy Emily looked, how this was the culmination of everything we'd worked toward for the past 18 months. Then Pastor Williams reached the part of the ceremony that's usually just a formality, the part where he asks if anyone has any reason why the couple should not be joined in marriage. If any person can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. In all the weddings I'd attended in my 52 years, I had never heard anyone actually respond to that question. It's just a traditional part of the ceremony, a leftover from centuries past when marriages were more about business arrangements than love, and there might actually be legal impediments that needed to be addressed. But as Pastor Williams spoke those words, I heard a chair scraping against the floor at the back of the ceremony space. I turned around along with most of the other guests, to see what was causing the disturbance. And there, standing up from a chair in the very back row, wearing a rumpled suit that looked like he'd slept in it, was Robert, my ex-husband, Emily's father, the man who had walked out on us 15 years ago and whom we hadn't invited to this wedding. For a moment I thought maybe he was just going to leave quietly. Maybe he'd realized he shouldn't be there and was going to slip out the back. But instead, Robert took a step forward and, in a voice loud enough for everyone in the ceremony space to hear clearly, shouted, "Stop this now. Emily, you can't marry him because he's already married to someone else." The silence that followed was deafening. Every single person in that room turned to stare at Robert, then at James, then at Emily, trying to process what had just been said. Emily's face went completely white, and she looked at James with an expression of confusion and growing panic. James immediately started shaking his head and trying to speak, but Robert wasn't finished. "James Morrison doesn't exist," Robert continued, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. "This man's real name is Jonathan Mitchell. He's been married to a woman named Sarah Mitchell for 5 years. They live in Brookline, Massachusetts, and they have 2 children together, ages 3 and 18 months. The wedding guests erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps. Emily's bridesmaids looked horrified. James's groomsmen appeared confused and embarrassed. And James himself looked like he was about to collapse. "Emily," James said, reaching for her hand, "this is insane. This man is obviously disturbed. I have no idea what he's talking about." But Robert was walking toward the altar now, pulling a manila folder out of his jacket pocket. "I have documentation," Robert said, his voice steady and clear despite the chaos he was causing. "I have copies of Jonathan Mitchell's marriage certificate to Sarah Patricia Walsh, dated June 15, 2019. I have photographs of him with his wife and children taken 3 weeks ago at a birthday party in Massachusetts. I have bank records showing that he's been maintaining 2 separate identities, 2 separate credit histories, and 2 separate lives." Pastor Williams looked completely bewildered and asked, "What is the meaning of this? James, do you know this man?" James was now visibly shaking, and his face had gone from white to red to white again. This is my future father-in-law," he said weakly. "But he's been out of Emily's life for years. He's obviously trying to sabotage our wedding, because he's jealous that Emily chose me to walk her down the aisle instead of him." "No," Robert said firmly, opening his folder and pulling out what looked like official documents. "I'm trying to save my daughter from making the biggest mistake of her life by marrying a man who is already married to someone else, and who has been lying to her about every single aspect of his identity for the past 2 years. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. Or maybe Robert had finally lost his mind completely and was having some sort of psychotic break. But as I looked at James's face, I saw something that made my blood run cold: guilt. Emily was staring at James with tears streaming down her face. "James, tell me this isn't true," she whispered. "Tell me you're not married to someone else." James opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. And in that silence, everyone in the room began to understand that Robert wasn't lying. "Oh my God," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, it's true, isn't it? What do you think happened next? Drop the word betrayal in the comments if you think Emily should have seen the signs earlier. And make sure you're subscribed because the revelations that are about to unfold will shock you even more than what we've already uncovered." James finally found his voice, but instead of denying Robert's accusations, he tried to explain them away. "Emily, it's complicated," he said, reaching for her hands, which she immediately pulled away from him. "Yes, technically I'm still married, but Sarah and I have been separated for over a year. We've been living completely separate lives, and I was planning to file for divorce after our honeymoon." "Technically married?" Emily repeated, her voice rising with each word. "You're technically married? What does that even mean, James? Either you're married or you're not." Robert stepped closer to the altar, still holding his folder of evidence. "He's not separated," he said grimly. "I have photographs of him at his daughter's 3rd birthday party 3 weeks ago, playing happy family with his wife and kids. I have credit card records showing that he's been using both identities simultaneously, maintaining households in both Boston and Denver. This isn't a separation, Emily. This is bigamy." The word bigamy sent another shockwave through the wedding guests. Several people stood up to get a better view of what was happening, and I could hear whispered conversations breaking out all over the ceremony space. Emily's maid of honor, her best friend Jessica from college, stepped forward and put her arm around Emily's shoulders. I think we should take a break from this ceremony," she said quietly. "Maybe everyone should go to the cocktail reception while you and James sort this out privately." But Emily shook her head. "No," she said, her voice getting stronger. "I want to hear this. I want to hear all of it. Right here, right now, in front of everyone who came here to watch me marry a man who's been lying to me for 2 years." She turned to face James directly, and even through her tears, I could see the steel in her eyes that she'd inherited from me. "Is Robert telling the truth?" she demanded. "Are you really Jonathan Mitchell? Are you really married to another woman? Do you really have children?" James looked around desperately, as if he was hoping someone would come to his rescue. But the only faces staring back at him were filled with shock and disgust. Even his own groomsmen were backing away from him. "Emily, please," he said. "Let me explain." "It's not what you think." "Then explain it," Emily shouted. "Explain to me how you've been living a double life for 2 years. Explain to me how you proposed to me when you're already married. Explain to me how you were planning to commit bigamy." James looked at the floor for a long moment, and when he raised his head, I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. the look of a man who knew he'd been caught and had no way out. "My name is Jonathan Mitchell," he said quietly. "I am married to Sarah Mitchell, and we have 2 children together. But Emily, I love you. I fell in love with you the moment I met you. And everything I felt for you was real." The gasps from the wedding guests were audible, and I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Emily's beautiful wedding, the day we'd planned for 18 months, the thousands of dollars we'd spent, the dreams we'd built together. All of it was crashing down around us because the man she loved didn't exist. "If everything you felt for me was real," Emily said, her voice shaking with rage, "then why didn't you get divorced from your wife before you started a relationship with me? Why did you create a fake identity? Why did you lie to me about everything?" "Because I knew you wouldn't date a married man," James/Jonathan admitted. "I knew that if I told you the truth about my situation, I'd never have a chance with you. And I couldn't bear the thought of not being with you. So instead you decided to destroy my life." Emily screamed. "You decided to make me an unknowing participant in adultery. You decided to make me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist." Robert stepped forward again, and I realized he wasn't finished revealing the extent of Jonathan's deception. "Emily, there's more," he said gently. "The family he brought to the wedding, the people who claim to be his parents and sister? I have reason to believe they're not his real family either." All eyes turned to the people who had been introduced to us as Dr. Richard Morrison, Dr. Patricia Morrison, and Rebecca Morrison. They were sitting in the second row looking extremely uncomfortable, and when everyone started staring at them, Dr. Richard Morrison stood up. "We need to leave," he said to his wife and daughter. "This has gone too far." "Wait a minute," Emily said, walking toward them. "Who are you people? Are you actually his family or not?" Dr. Morrison looked at Jonathan with an expression of disgust. "We are not related to this man in any way," he said. "We were hired to play the role of his family for this wedding. We were told it was for a practical joke, not for something like this. We had no idea we were participating in fraud." The revelation that even Jonathan's family had been fake sent the wedding guests into complete chaos. People were standing up, talking loudly, some heading for the exits, others pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Emily looked like she was about to collapse. "You hired actors to play your family," she said incredulously. "For 2 years I've been hearing stories about your parents and your sister. And they're not even real people?" "Emily, please," Jonathan said desperately. "I can explain everything. I never meant for it to go this far. I was planning to tell you the truth after the wedding." "After the wedding?" Emily laughed, but it was a bitter, heartbroken sound. "You were planning to tell me I just married a bigamist after we were already legally married? How exactly was that going to work?" Robert stepped forward with more documents from his folder. "There's something else you need to know," he said to Emily. "He's done this before. I found records of at least 2 other women in other cities who fell victim to the same scam. Jonathan Mitchell creates false identities, courts successful women, gains access to their finances, and then disappears after the wedding with whatever money he can get his hands on. I felt like I was going to be sick. My daughter hadn't just fallen in love with a married man. She'd fallen in love with a professional con artist who specialized in wedding fraud." Emily turned to look at me, and I saw in her eyes the same devastation I'd felt 15 years ago when I discovered that Robert had been cheating on me. But this was so much worse than simple adultery. This was elaborate, calculated fraud that had been planned and executed over the course of 2 years. "The joint bank account," Emily said suddenly, her face going white. "We opened a joint bank account 6 months ago to save for the honeymoon and our future together. How much money is in it?" Jonathan didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. Emily pulled out her phone and called her bank's customer service line. After a few minutes of being transferred and put on hold, she got the information she needed. "The account is empty," she announced to the room. "He withdrew everything yesterday. $23,000. Gone." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Jonathan hadn't just been planning to commit bigamy. He'd been planning to rob Emily and then disappear, probably to set up the same scam with some other unsuspecting woman in some other city. "You son of a bitch," I said, standing up and walking toward Jonathan. "You were going to steal my daughter's money and abandon her on her honeymoon, weren't you?" Jonathan backed away from me, but there was nowhere to go. He was surrounded by 200 angry wedding guests, who were beginning to understand the full scope of his deception. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said weakly. "I really did fall in love with Emily. That part was real." "Nothing about you is real," Emily shouted. "Your name isn't real, your family isn't real, your job probably isn't real, your feelings aren't real. You're just a pathetic criminal who preys on women who are stupid enough to trust you." "Emily, that's not true," Jonathan said. But his protest sounded hollow even to him. Pastor Williams, who had been standing silent and shocked through this entire revelation, finally spoke up. "I think it's clear that this ceremony cannot continue," he said. "Everyone should return to their homes, and the authorities should be contacted immediately." Several of the male wedding guests, including Emily's uncle and some of James's supposed business associates, had moved to block the exit so that Jonathan couldn't flee. Someone had already called the police, and we could hear sirens approaching the resort. Emily stood in the middle of the ceremony space in her beautiful wedding gown, surrounded by the wreckage of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and began to cry. Not the gentle tears of a happy bride, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone whose heart had been completely shattered. I went to her and wrapped my arms around her, and she collapsed against me like the little girl she used to be when she was hurt and needed her mother to make everything better. But this wasn't something I could fix with a kiss and a band-aid. This was going to take time and healing and probably therapy to get past. As the police arrived and began arresting Jonathan for fraud and bigamy, I found myself looking at Robert, the man I'd spent 15 years hating, the man I'd blamed for every difficult moment Emily and I had faced as a single-parent family. "How did you know?" I asked him. "How did you find out about all of this?" Robert's expression was sad and tired, but also relieved that the truth had finally come out. "I hired a private investigator," he said simply. "When Emily posted about her engagement on social media, I saw the photos of her with James, and something about him bothered me. Maybe it was father's intuition, or maybe it was just that he seemed too good to be true. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong." "So you've been investigating him for 2 years?" "For about 6 months. It took the investigator a while to uncover the truth, because Jonathan is very good at covering his tracks. But once we found the marriage certificate and tracked down his real wife, everything else started falling into place." I stared at this man who had caused me so much pain and disappointment, who had abandoned his daughter when she needed him most, who had missed years of birthdays and school plays and father-daughter moments. And I realized that in the most important moment of Emily's adult life, he had been the one to protect her. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" I asked. "Why did you wait until the wedding day?" Robert's shoulders sagged, and for the first time I could remember, he looked genuinely vulnerable. "Because I knew Emily wouldn't believe me," he said. "I knew that if I came to her with this information, she'd think I was just trying to sabotage her happiness out of jealousy or spite. And honestly, Linda, I wasn't sure you wouldn't think the same thing. I figured the only way to make sure she heard the truth was to present it in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed." As much as I hated to admit it, he was probably right. If Robert had approached either Emily or me with accusations against James, we probably would have assumed he was trying to cause trouble and wouldn't have taken his concerns seriously. The police finished arresting Jonathan and were beginning to take statements from the wedding guests. Emily had stopped crying and was now sitting quietly, still in her wedding dress, looking stunned and exhausted. "What happens now?" she asked no one in particular. I sat down next to her and took her hand. "Now we go home," I said. "We figure out how to clean up this mess, we get your money back, and we help you heal from this betrayal. And we'll get through it together, just like we've gotten through everything else." Emily looked around the ceremony space, which an hour ago had been the setting for her fairy tale wedding, and was now a crime scene. "I feel so stupid," she said quietly. "How could I not have seen any of the signs? How could I have been so completely fooled for 2 years?" "You're not stupid," Robert said, approaching us carefully. "You're trusting and loving, and he took advantage of those qualities. That makes him a predator, not you a victim." Emily looked at her father for the first time since he'd interrupted her wedding, really looked at him, and I could see her trying to process everything that had happened. "You saved me," she said simply. "I don't understand why, and I'm not ready to forgive you for all the years you weren't here, But you saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Robert's eyes filled with tears. You're my daughter, he said. No matter what mistakes I've made, no matter how much I've failed you in the past, you're still my little girl. And I will always try to protect you when you need it. It was the beginning of a conversation that would continue for months to come. A slow and difficult process of rebuilding trust and healing old wounds. But in that moment, standing in the wreckage of Emily's wedding, I understood that sometimes the people who hurt us the most can also be the ones who save us when we need it most. The reception was canceled, obviously. The guests went home with a story they'd be telling for years to come. The vendors were apologetic but still expected to be paid. And Emily and I drove back to Denver in silence, both of us trying to process what had just happened. Over the following weeks, the full extent of Jonathan's deception became clear. He was indeed married to Sarah Mitchell, and she had no idea that her husband had been living a double life. He did have 2 young children who would now grow up knowing their father was a criminal. His architectural firm in Denver was legitimate, but it was built on money stolen from previous victims. Emily was able to recover most of the money from their joint account, and Jonathan was eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud, bigamy, and theft. The other women he had victimized came forward, and Emily found some comfort in knowing she wasn't alone in having been deceived by him. But the real healing came from an unexpected source. Robert. In the months following the wedding disaster, Robert made a genuine effort to rebuild his relationship with Emily, and to a lesser extent with me. He explained that he had left our family not because he didn't love us, but because he had been struggling with alcoholism and gambling addiction, and knew he was destroying our lives. Rather than continue to hurt us, he had made the painful decision to remove himself from our lives entirely. It was the wrong choice, he admitted during one of our family therapy sessions. I should have gotten help and fought for my family instead of running away. But at the time, I thought I was protecting you by leaving. Emily was understandably angry and hurt, and it took many months of therapy and honest conversation before she was able to forgive her father for abandoning her. But gradually, they built a new relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than the fantasies and disappointments of the past. As for me, I had to confront my own feelings about Robert and acknowledge that while he had hurt us deeply, he had also ultimately been the one to save Emily from a marriage that would have destroyed her life. It was a complicated mix of gratitude and resentment that took time to sort through. Today, 2 years after the wedding that never happened, Emily is in a healthy relationship with a wonderful man named David, who knows the whole story and loves her anyway. She's learned to trust again, but more carefully this time, and she's stronger for having survived such a devastating betrayal. Robert is sober, remarried to a lovely woman who understands his past, and present in Emily's life in a way he never was when she was growing up. They'll never have the father-daughter relationship they might have had if he'd made different choices 20 years ago, but they have something genuine and meaningful now. And I've learned that sometimes the people we think are our enemies are actually our protectors, and sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the most important growth and healing. If someone had told me on Emily's wedding day that 2 years later I'd be grateful to my ex-husband for ruining my daughter's wedding, I would have thought they were insane. But life has a way of turning our assumptions upside down, and showing us that things are rarely as simple as they first appear. Emily's fairy tale wedding didn't happen that day, but something more important did. She was saved from a nightmare marriage by a father who loved her enough to risk her hatred in order to protect her from a man who would have destroyed her life. Sometimes the real heroes of our stories are the people we least expect, and sometimes the worst days of our lives are actually the days that save us from something much worse. What do you think about forgiveness and second chances? Have you ever had someone you disliked turn out to be your protector? Do you think Robert made the right choice in waiting until the wedding day to reveal the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about families who discovered that love and protection can come from the most unexpected places. Because sometimes the people who disrupt our perfect moments are actually the ones who save us from our biggest mistakes.